Two officers assumed they could intimidate the wrong man and suffer no fallout. They were gravely mistaken and learned so the hard way. It began on a stifling Saturday night in Willow Springs, Texas, one of those oppressively still evenings where even the pavement seems to hold its breath. Outside a corner store called Sammy's Quick Mart, a man in navy scrubs balanced a bag of groceries in his car keys. That was Jordan Rivers, 34, gentle by nature, always tipping generously and holding doors open without a second thought. He'd just wrapped a grueling 12-hour shift at Shepherd Medical Center, tending to trauma victims, and patching up strangers with nothing but his aching feet reminding him of the late hour and that juicy barbecue waiting at home. Then came the screech of tires, the echo of doors slamming open, and two boots pounding the asphalt toward him. "Drop the bag now," barked a voice. Spinning around, Jordan clutched his sack of Gatorades and chips as a stocky cop with a red buzz cut and another lanky officer with an ill-fitting mustache closed in hands hovering over their holsters. License and registration demanded the shorter man slapping the bag from Jordan's grip like it was garbage. Gatorades clattered into the street as Whitman accused him of matching the description, then twisted his wrists until the handcuffs bit into his skin. In the squad car's back seat, Jordan sat silent, wrists raw, while the two officers chattered about the latest basketball scores. No Miranda warning, no explanation, just the sour odor of sweat and stale coffee on cracked vinyl. At the station's grim booking desk, an elderly clerk glanced up from her crossword, her tired eyes flicking between Jordan and his captors. Shoplifting suspect Avery announced, dropping a clipboard. She buzzed him through without protest into a windowless cell of concrete and steel. Hours crawled by in the cold darkness, no phone call, no rights read, no paperwork, until Officer Whitman finally returned holding a flimsy manila folder. He flipped the folder open with a dramatic flourish. "Well, you're not our guy," Whitman announced. Jordan remained seated, his fists clenching in his lap. "But you still match the description," Whitman added offhand. Dark hoodie, dark pants, male, black, like he was noting a missing remote. No apology, no remorse, just a shrug and a half smirk. "You're free to leave," he tossed the folder onto the bench as though doing Jordan a favor. Jordan rose slowly, his joints protesting after hours on that cold steel bench. He walked past them in silence, not because he had nothing to say, but because he had a plan, and big ones at that. Stepping out into the night, he didn't feel liberated. He felt like a shaken soda can, dented on the outside and ready to burst within. Yet he wasn't about to blow up. He'd let his actions speak loud enough soon. Back at home, he sat at his kitchen table under the dim hood light, phone buzzing with messages, friends, coworkers, strangers sharing the viral video of his arrest. The comments stung more than the bruises on his wrists just buying Gatorade. They don't even hide it anymore. Scrolling made him feel smaller, angry or drained. He considered brushing it off next morning with a half-hearted joke, pretending nothing happened. Then his gaze landed on a framed photo of his father in his army uniform. Reverend Lionel Rivers had survived war and segregation, always insisting never let anyone steal your dignity. Jordan sat taller, opened his closet, and pulled out his own army dress uniform medals. From Afghanistan, Haiti, Louisiana reminders, he was more than a nurse or a late-night shopper. He was a soldier, a protector. By midnight, he had a strategy: no angry posts, no pleas for pity. He would march into the station and force them to recognize him. He spent the next day collecting witness statements, screenshots, and drafting a crisp, typo-free complaint letter. He even called an old army buddy now, serving as a legal advisor. When he zipped up his uniform the next morning, something inside him snapped into place. He felt ready, steady, unafraid. Pulling into the station's lot at 9:00 sharp, he stepped out, letting the sun glint off his ribbons. Officers on smoke break glanced over. A rookie nudged his partner. Jordan smoothed his sleeves, tipped his cap, and strode through the doors. His boots rang out on the tile floor, every echo a promise that the real fight was just beginning. Behind the glass at the reception desk, the same older woman from that night 2 days ago looked up at him. Her mouth opened as if to speak, but she held back and simply buzzed him in. Inside, the atmosphere felt dense, almost oppressive. At a cluster of desks ahead, officers Whitman and Avery sat sipping coffee and shuffling papers. Jordan paused about 10 feet away and said evenly, "Good morning. I'm here to submit a formal complaint about your officer's conduct." He saw them register shock, the slow swivel of Whitman's head, the way Avery's eyes widened and his shoulders tensed. Recognition hit them like a punch. "Sir," the woman at the desk called gently. "The watch commander will see you now." Jordan nodded crisply and followed her down the corridor. In the commander's office stood Captain Elise Monroe, late 50s, salt and pepper hair, pulled back her posture, all business. Beside her leaned Captain Jeremiah Knox, his Army JAG badge clipped to his belt. Both rose as he entered. Monroe's gaze locked on the rows of ribbons shining on Jordan's chest. A heavy silence filled the room. "Mr. Rivers," Captain Monroe said at last, her tone grave. "Thank you for coming." Jordan laid the neatly organized complaint packet on the table. No emotion, just clear facts, eyewitness statements, video clips, documentation of wrongful detention, physical injuries, and unprovoked humiliation. Captain Knox added 2 more pages, a request for an internal affairs probe and a notice to the Department of Defense about mistreatment of military personnel. Monroe's expression tightened. "You know this is serious," she said. "I do," Jordan replied, meeting her eyes. Outside the office window, Whitman and Avery shifted uncomfortably, their hands empty, to intervene. Captain Monroe gave a firm nod. "We'll launch an immediate review," she announced. "Both officers will be placed on administrative leave pending the investigation." Jordan said nothing more. He gathered his copies, slipped them under his arm, and turned to go. As he passed back through the lobby, he caught one final glimpse of Whitman and Avery, the two who thought they were untouchable, who had laughed at him and thrown him aside like refuse, now sitting pale and silent, crushed under the very weight they had tried to impose on someone else. But the real reckoning was only just beginning. The momentum was unstoppable, and by Monday morning, Willow Springs was aflutter with outrage. The video of the arrest had gone viral overnight. Local newscasts ran breaking reports on the hour, their banners proclaiming Army veteran nurse wrongfully detained by Willow Springs police and caught on camera, unjustified humiliation. Before lunch, national outlets had picked up the story, amplifying every frame of the rough treatment. By midday, the mayor's office issued a formal press release pledging a comprehensive, impartial review of the incident. Inside the police department, Whitman and Avery looked as though a decade had been stripped from their lives overnight. They clocked in for their shifts with hunched shoulders and haunted expressions. Hallway whispers trailed their every step. The same colleagues who once chuckled at their bravado now averted their eyes. Official memos arrived by courier. Both officers were placed on immediate administrative leave, and an internal affairs probe was opened. Jordan's legal team had already retained a high-profile civil rights attorney, signaling that the scrutiny would only intensify. Whitman tried to downplay the scandal, smirking to anyone who'd listen that it was all just a mix-up, but the words fell flat. Avery said nothing, burying his fists deep in his jacket pockets each time their names were mentioned. They couldn't laugh away the truth, and that reality carried more weight than any protest could. Meanwhile, Jordan's own life spun in a different direction. Messages of gratitude poured in from fellow nurses, service members, neighbors, even strangers on the other side of the country. "Thank you for standing up. You make us proud. We've got your back." It wasn't mere sympathy, it was solidarity in action. One afternoon at a local cafe called the Grindhouse, an elderly man wearing a Vietnam veteran cap tapped Jordan on the shoulder. His voice was gravelly but firm. "Son, you didn't just defend yourself, you defended every one of us who's ever been shoved aside and told we don't count." Jordan fought back emotion, nodding as the weight of that recognition settled in his chest. Sometimes the veteran added softly, "The quietest victories are the ones we never see on TV." Over the next several weeks, both Whitman and Avery faced formal disciplinary panels. Leaked documents revealed a pattern of past complaints against Moss, them cases quietly shelved or dismissed. It became clear that Jordan was far from the first innocent person they'd targeted. He was simply the first who refused to disappear. Within 2 months, both officers were suspended without pay, and departmental recommendations for termination were on every desk. Behind closed doors, civil lawsuits were being drafted. The legal action promised to expose even more of the department's failures. In the end, Jordan didn't have to shout to be heard. By unleashing nothing but the unvarnished truth, he set a reckoning in motion that no one could ignore. Not only did Jordan's courage inspire his own case, but it emboldened others to step forward, sharing their stories of mistreatment and demanding accountability. Meanwhile, he didn't vanish from sight or hide behind bitterness. He returned to Shepherd Medical Center, continuing to care for patients with the same compassion he'd always shown. Yet now, as he strode through hospital corridors, he was no longer just the nurse. He was the man who endured injustice and rose above it. His victory wasn't born of vengeance, but a powerful reminder that dignity isn't handed out, it's defended. Inevitably, headlines shifted to fresh controversies. But Willow Springs didn't forget Jordan Rivers. His ordeal catalyzed real reforms at the police department, new bias awareness programs, a strict policy that body cameras remain activated, and tougher procedures for handling civilian complaints. These changes came late and in small steps, but they marked progress nonetheless. Jordan never campaigned from a podium, he didn't parade outside the courthouse or clamor for attention. Instead, on Veterans Day, he quietly addressed local high schoolers about service resilience and nonviolent resistance. He told them that injustice is real and that true strength lies in preserving your composure when everything in you demands an outburst, that defending your self-respect matters more than blaming others. The students listened closely, not to a viral figure on a screen, but to a real person standing before them in a uniform that symbolized more than rank. It symbolized character. Weeks later, Jordan received 2 formal letters, one from the mayor offering an official apology, another from the Department of Defense, thanking him for exemplifying American ideals. He tucked both into a drawer under his bed, choosing to store not trophies, but reminders of the quiet impact one person can have. For him, the true reward was knowing that someone out there had seen how he handled injustice and resolved to stand a little taller when faced with their own trials. He understood that racism and misuse of authority were not new, and that systemic change doesn't erupt overnight. It builds through countless small acts of courage and restraint. Every decision to remain calm in the face of provocation, every refusal to let humiliation break you, every forward step when all you want is to give up, that is the work of transformation. Jordan Rivers. His story isn't about getting even. It's about showing the power of self-possession. It proves that respect can be demanded with calm conviction, that authority doesn't reside solely in badges or titles, but in the unshakable knowledge of one's own worth. That lesson belongs to all of us. If his journey moved, you share it with someone who needs to remember that dignity must be defended, not begged for. And when life tries to knock you down, keep standing, keep speaking, and never let anger rob you of your self-respect. 4 months later, the atmosphere in Willow Springs had shifted dramatically. New welcome signs at the town's entrances now included the tagline "Respect All," and even the coffee shop where he often stopped by had added a plaque reading, "Thank you to those who speak up." Ever since he filed his complaint and the wheels of reform began turning, numerous blind spots in the department were exposed: sloppy procedures, contempt for civilians, and long-ignored grievances. At least 3 surprise audits have taken place at the station, revealing that procedural compliance has climbed to 90%, and complaints of racial profiling have dropped sharply. He's become a familiar figure around town, continuing his work at the medical center in uniform. Now, whenever he walks the hospital halls in his military dress, colleagues and patients don't just thank him, they look at him with genuine respect, greeting him like a trusted, courageous friend. One weekend, he joined a Voices of the People forum at the public library, where young students, parents, and even reassigned officers, once part of the old guard, came together to discuss building trust between citizens and law enforcement. His latest initiative, Mentor and Serve, brings veterans and healthcare workers into local schools to teach students patience, discipline, and compassion. They show young people how to recognize injustice and resolve conflict with words rather than violence. Funded in part by the Wilson Foundation, he helped establish the program, has now expanded into 3 neighboring towns. The biggest success in 4 months has been a renewed sense of community. Public speaking events, open dialogues, and citizen assemblies have become regular fixtures. Police Chief Robert Lawrence reports that public trust in the department has risen from 52% to 78%. New recruits now undergo a 6-week bias awareness and self-reflection course, co-taught by him and mental health professionals. Of course, the story isn't perfect. Critics still argue that change is too slow and that some veteran officers haven't fully absorbed the lesson. But overall, Willow Springs is heading in the right direction. He knows there's still work to be done. He still dreams of a day when the silent protocol is available to every resident, so no one ever has to wait 4 months for justice to arrive. Each morning he wakes up and looks in the bathroom mirror, reminding himself that he's no longer the man who was once handcuffed. He's the one who turned resentment into positive action. 4 months have passed, but the journey toward justice for him and for the entire community has only just begun. 1 year later, Willow Springs had become a model of community healing and accountability. The respect. All signs remained at every town entrance, but they'd been joined by banners celebrating the annual Unity Day, a block party co-organized by the police and local veterans groups. The Mentor and Serve program had grown into a fully funded nonprofit offering after-school workshops on conflict resolution and implicit bias in 5 surrounding counties. Inside the police department, the transformations ran deeper than new body cam policies. Veteran officers, some once skeptical, now volunteered as citizen liaisons, hosting coffee mornings where residents could speak candidly with precinct leaders. The Bias Awareness and Self-Reflection course had graduated 3 classes of recruits, and its curriculum was being adopted statewide. Complaints against officers had fallen by 65%, while community-reported trust scores climbed to 91%. At the hospital, he was no longer just that nurse who stood up. He'd been promoted to Director of Emergency Services and still answered every call wearing his dress uniform, with medals gleaming, a daily reminder that service and dignity go hand in hand. When he walked the corridors, now colleagues stopped to salute. Patients wrote him thank you notes that lined a bulletin board outside his office. His Wilson Foundation for Justice Reform had launched a scholarship fund for minority students pursuing law enforcement or healthcare careers, sending grants to 20 young people across 4 states. He also co-authored a white paper on civilian-military partnership in policing, which the state legislature cited when drafting new oversight legislation. Critics still pressed for broader reforms. Some towns lacked the resources to implement full body cam mandates or veteran-led mentoring, but the ripple effect was undeniable. Willow Springs Police Chief Lawrence was flown to speak at national conferences, sharing how one man's silent resolve triggered a movement. Each morning over coffee at Sammy's Quick Mart, now renamed Rivers and Friends, he reflected on how far the town had come. The place that once arrested him without cause was now one of the safest, most inclusive in the region. He knew the fight for justice never truly ends, but seeing a Child's I Stand With You poster taped to a patrol car reminded him change begins when one person refuses to be silenced. 1 year later, his voice was louder than ever, and it spoke for an entire community. This story shows us that the power of silence can become the sharpest weapon against injustice, and that dignity should never be traded for rash anger or momentary violence. When thrust into circumstances of unfair treatment, it's easy to react impulsively, but it is precisely patience and composure that can change the course of events. If I were in the protagonist's position, my next step would not stop at demanding justice for myself, but would expand my influence by partnering with social organizations, launching awareness campaigns about racism, and building a support network for victims. I would intensify efforts to document and transparently release evidence and testimonies to prevent similar incidents, while simultaneously developing training programs for both law enforcement officers and the broader community. As for whether racism will be entirely eradicated by 2050, it's not a simple yes. While laws and technology may advance, deep-seated prejudices within thought and culture require step-by-step remedies. If we fail to continually challenge them, educate ourselves, and maintain open dialogue, racism will merely evolve into subtler forms. By 2050, our hope should be to have laid a solid foundation for future generations where no one must fight for basic human respect, but rather is naturally treated with dignity from within. Yet to achieve that, every one of us must continue to choose purposeful silence, transform it into action, and ensure that the voice of conscience is never drowned out.